You are standing beneath vaulted stone arches. The air is cold, thick with the scent of incense and centuries of silence. Candles flicker across the cathedral floor, throwing trembling shadows on walls painted with saints and sinners. Your boots echo against ancient slabs, once kissed by royalty, once soaked in something darker than devotion. This place is not just sacred, it is sovereign. It is here, in cathedrals like this one, that kings were crowned by bishops' hands, bathed in holy oil, mouths mouthing oaths of peace. Even as their hearts beat with bloodlust, you stare at the altar, chiseled from red-veined marble. Its surface is smooth, but you imagine it once bore the weight of a trembling body. Not a lamb, not a relic, a man, perhaps a child, perhaps a traitor, perhaps just someone inconvenient. And still, the candles burn. For centuries, the line between God and king was blurred, not by accident, but by design. Monarchs didn't just wear crowns, they wore halos. They didn't just rule the people, they ruled their souls. Because divine right was more than a belief, it was a weapon. The church gave monarchs a face like Christ, and a sword like Caesar. And in return, the crown-built cathedrals filled coffers and protected priests from the same justice they imposed. You walk past a stained glass window. It glows red, not from light, but from memory. You see the shape of a woman kneeling. A bishop stands behind her, eyes closed. A king to the side, expressionless. You recognize the scene. Not a martyrdom, not a miracle, an execution, disguised as a sacrament. Punishment, in those centuries, was never just punishment. It was theater, it was ritual. It was God's judgment, made flesh, often while the choir sang, the rack, the wheel, the flaying knife. These instruments weren't seen as cruelty, they were justice. They were divine purification, and the church, the very symbol of mercy, looked away. Sometimes it looked on. You see a bishop's throne, carved from oak, blackened by time. On its armrest, a small stain, dark, oily, older than memory. You touch it, and you imagine the whispers that once echoed here. She cursed the queen. He consorted with devils. Their screams are the devil leaving the body, but even devils die quietly when God turns his face. And in the centuries that followed, some punishments became too brutal, too grotesque, even for those who claimed to speak for the divine. Because, eventually, the spectacle became shame, the sacred became scandal, and the church, once complicit, began to ban the very rituals it once blessed, not out of mercy, but out of fear. Fear of what history might remember. You look back at the altar now, and it seems to breathe, not with holiness, but with hunger for blood, for silence, for the kind of memory that stains. These punishments weren't lost by accident. They were buried in ash, buried in shame, buried beneath stone floors, just like the one beneath your feet. You take one final step and hear a whisper in the dark. Even the church looked away. You hear metal long before you see it. A slow scraping sound, like armor dragging against stone, echoes from a dark corridor behind you. You follow the sound down a narrow passage, torchlight flickering on the cold walls, the air growing, hotter, thicker. Then you see it. The bull dot at first, it looks like a statue, majestic, regal, too smooth to be real. But then you notice the slits carved into its mouth, the blackened holes beneath its eyes, and the seam running down its belly, sealed now with rivets of iron. This is no tribute to nature. It is a tomb, a furnace, a lie molded into the shape of life. The year is 1381. The place, the Duchy of Burgundy. A noble family is torn apart by betrayal. A cousin dares question the Duke's divine right, not with arms, but with words. For that, he is condemned to the bull. They call it justice, but you know it's vengeance. The man is stripped and dragged, wrists tied in front of him, his legs kicking in dirt as the soldiers force him forward. The priests chant, not to bless his soul, but to silence their own. Even the executioner won't meet his eyes. The door to the bull creaks open. Inside, it is pitch black. Just enough space to kneel, barely enough to scream. He pleads once, then curses, then laughs, but the sound dies quickly as the door slams shut. The forge begins slow at first, coals glowing beneath the belly. Then flames rise, licking the base of the beast. The iron skin begins to warm, then burn, then see a dot inside. His flesh bubbles, his lungs collapse. His skin sticks to iron like wax to a candle mold. But outside, the bull moans. That was the true horror, the invention's genius. The sound tubes inside the head twisted the victim's screams into animal bellows. To the crowd, it sounded like the bull was alive. Enraged, roaring children covered their ears. Mothers wept. The Duke watched in silence. Sipping wine, they called it the Devil's Opera, a symphony of agony. Perfected cruelty in the guise of art. Even the church, used to blood and fire, recoiled. A local bishop declared the device too close to hell to be earthly. He wrote, "No soul should leave the body through the throat of a beast." But by then, it was too late. The bull had sung, and the Duke had tasted power deeper than death. Later, the church demanded its destruction. The bull was melted down and reforged into a cathedral bell. They called it redemption, but you can still hear it. That bell that rings with a strange tone, hollow, trembling, almost human, they say. The metal remembers, and when the wind is just right, you can hear a cry inside the clang. Not a man, not a beast, but something in between. You step closer to the rusted remnants in the chamber now, and you feel heat. Even though the fire has long since died, the bull is no longer whole. Broken, split, forgotten, but it is not silent. Some say it groans at night. Others say it breathes. But all agree the bull was never meant to exist. You reach out, and the metal pulses, like it knows. You are no longer underground. The light has changed, sharp, punishing, almost divine. The shadows are fewer here, but the cruelty, somehow brighter. You are in Castile. In the late 1400s, a courtyard sits in the center of the palace, white stone. Golden sun, and silence broken only by the flutter of a banner bearing the crest of Queen Isabella. The air smells of lavender, oil, and something sour beneath it. Something buried, something burned. At the center of the courtyard stands a box, not made of wood, not made of stone glass. Its surface gleams in the heat, glinting like a jewel in the sun. But as you step closer, your skin prickles with unease. It is not empty inside. It is a girl. She is young, barely 20. Her eyes are closed. Her hair floats around her face in clumps of sweat. Her dress is white, clinging to her damp skin. She is not asleep. She is not at peace. She is baking. The coffin is sealed airtight. No airflow, no escape. The sunlight pierces through the glass like knives, turning the chamber into an oven. Inside, her body trembles as the heat rises. You can almost hear it, the slow boil beneath her skin. This is no execution. This is purification. The ritual was simple. If a noble girl was suspected of impurity, an affair, a secret birth, even a gaze held too long, she would be locked inside the glass for 1 full day. If she survived, she was declared cleansed. If she didn't, the queen declared her judged by God. The practice began quietly, hidden whispers behind palace walls. But soon, the queen made it public, a symbol of holy discipline, Castilian virtue, and royal authority. And worse, she made it beautiful. The glass box was displayed like a reliquary. The girls were dressed in white, as if for communion. Priests circled the chamber, chanting psalms. Noble women wept behind lace veils. Courtiers watched with unreadable eyes. It was a spectacle of shame and piety. The queen believed it was divine justice. "Let God decide," she once said, "for man is too weak to judge a woman's soul." But it was not God who designed the box, it was her. You move closer now, your breath fogging a corner of the coffin. Inside, the girl's lips are cracked. Her eyes flutter open, barely. She sees you, and for a moment, so does everyone who has ever been locked inside. You hear their screams, not loud, not desperate, just quiet, resigned, like steam escaping through skin. There were dozens, maybe more, but the punishment only ended after the wrong girl was chosen. A bishop's daughter, innocent, devout, beloved by her father, was accused by a jealous rival. She didn't last an hour. When they opened the coffin, her skin had fused the glass. Her tongue had split from thirst. Her father never spoke again. The church responded with fury. The ritual was condemned as pagan, a son sacrifice unfit for Christian soil. The glass coffins were shattered. The queen never spoke of them again. But the courtyard remains, empty now, silent, except for the heat. Even now, the stones are strangely warm beneath your feet. Even now, the scent of scorched silk lingers in the wind. You touch the ground, and it almost burns. You stand, and in the reflection of a window pane, you see her face again, not dead, not gone, just watching. From behind the glass, you are in a garden now, but not the kind that offers peace. The roses bloom, yes, violently red. The hedges are cut into perfect squares, each trimmed to the inch. The trees sway gently, their blossoms sweet on the air. But something is wrong. There is a heaviness in the air that no spring wind can lift. A scent that sneaks beneath the jasmine and orange blossom. Something rotten, syrupy, alive. And then you see it, a throne, cast from bronze and gold, sits at the center of the garden like a crown left in the dirt. It glows in the morning light, too bright, too beautiful. But as you step closer, your stomach turns. It is stained, not with rust, with honey, dot, and blood. Persia, 1574. A prince accused of betrayal, not of state, but of bloodline, whispers. Say he loved too deeply, too freely, that he challenged his brother's claim to the throne. Not with an army, but with a secret marriage. For that, he was made an example. The punishment was not meant to kill him. No death would have been mercy. It was meant to humiliate, to unmake. He was stripped of his robes, stripped of his name, and bound naked to the honey throne. A servant coated him with thick, glistening syrup, every inch, his eyelids, his lips, his genitals. Then they waited. First came the flies, then the ants, then the hornets. By noon, the bees had arrived, swarming in golden clouds. At first they drank, then they fed, They crawled into his ears, his nose, his mouth, and still he was alive. For 2 days, courtiers were made to pass by him on their way to supper. They were told to smile, to bow, to whisper blessings, as if the prince were a living saint. Some fainted, others vomited. None dared disobey. You step closer now, the stone path still sticky underfoot, and you imagine it, his skin raw, blistered, his tongue swollen, coated in insects, his eyes open, unblinking, while his body was consumed, not by flame, not by sword, but by sweetness. That was the horror, the elegance, the spectacle, punishment in silk, torture in bloom. The Sultan who ordered it never apologized. He simply remarked, "Let the flies feast on treason, for I shall not." But the church, watching from afar, was horrified. European emissaries called it carnal blasphemy, a crime against not just flesh, but soul. They petitioned the Persian court to end the practice. Some say gold was exchanged, others say threats were made. The throne was removed, hidden, supposedly melted down, but it wasn't. You're looking at it now. Its surface gleams, not with honey, but memory. The insects are long gone, but the air still hums faintly, like wings, and the bees, they never left. You see one now, crawling along the armrest. It pauses, looks at you, then vanishes into the hedge. There are no guards here, no plaques, just silence, and yet you feel watched. Some say the prince never truly died, that his soul remains stuck to the throne like sugar on skin, not screaming, not angry, just waiting for someone to sit. You hear singing before you see them, a soft, breathy hum drifting through the corridors of the abbey, melodic, slow, almost beautiful. But there's something hollow about it, like voices trying to rise from water. You follow the sound down a vaulted hallway, lined with stone saints and shadowed confessionals. A heavy wooden door creaks open, and you're in the royal chapel of 12th century England at first glance. It looks like a pageant. A dozen men in robes, heads bowed, standing in a perfect crescent around the altar. Their mouths are moving, their eyes are open, their hands are clasped in prayer. But then you step closer, and you realize the truth. Their mouths move, yes, but they do not sing. They hum, they groan, they wail, without words, because they no longer have words. Each tongue is gone, cut out, sewn shut, silenced. These are not monks. They are poets, philosophers, pamphleteers, men who wrote too freely, too truthfully. One dared call the Queen's mercy a myth. Another compared the king to a wolf. A third, a simple scribe, wrote of the hunger in the streets that was enough. Their punishment was not exile, not death. It was performance. They were forced to sing every Sunday, dressed in sacred robes, bathed in candlelight, placed before nobles who smiled as if attending mass, their mutilated throats strained, to hum psalms, disfigured voices echoing through the cathedral like the wind through broken flutes. And this was their penance, a lifetime of hymns without words, of truth without tongue. You watch one of them now, a man in his 40s, his lips move in slow rhythm. You see the stitch marks. The blood is long gone, but the scars never healed. He sees you, and for a moment, you feel him trying to speak, not with sound, but with eyes. His stare says what his mouth cannot. Remember me, The church did not invent this punishment, but it allowed it for decades. Bishops and cardinals sat quietly as the crown repurposed its sacred spaces into theaters of censorship. They called it divine mutilation, a cleansing of heretical speech through physical silence. Some even claimed it made the hymns more holy. But one day, the wrong man was silenced. A monk, young, fierce, devout. He had written a letter not to slander the king, but to protect a fellow brother accused of theft. The king's men took his tongue anyway. When he returned to the monastery, bloodied and broken, the abbot wept, and then rebelled. He wrote directly to Rome, a plea, a threat, a confession. The Pope was furious. The mutilation of the voice, especially the voices of clergy, was declared an abomination, a desecration of the breath God placed in man. The royal choir was disbanded. The practice outlawed, but not undone. You stand now in the quiet chapel, and the pews are empty. The windows are black with age. The altar is cracked, but the air still vibrates. You can still hear it, the ghost of a song with no words, a choir of pain humming through time. Some say if you sit here long enough, you begin to hum to dot, not because you know the tune, but because something inside you remembers it, and suddenly you understand why they were silenced. It wasn't because they lied, it was because they told the truth too clearly. You are walking through a garden again, but this one is different. No birds sing here, no bees buzz. The air is still cold, despite the midsummer sun. The soil beneath your feet crunches faintly, not with gravel, but with rust. You are in Bavaria, 1602. A garden constructed not to grow life, but to display death. It was designed by a queen, a widow too young to grieve, too clever to be dismissed. She called it her Iron Eden. The nobles called it's something else. Der Garten der Stummen, the garden of the silenced. From a distance, it was beautiful. Petals made of blackened steel, vines coiled from chains. A fountain that bled red water on feast days. The court admired it. Poets praised it until they looked closer, because this garden grew. With bodies, the queen was fond of pageantry and cruelty disguised as design. When enemies displeased her courtiers, diplomats, dissenters, she didn't send them to prison. She placed them in the garden, naked, painted in silver or gold. Leaf, then pierced slowly by iron thorns shaped like roses. Each plant was a spike. Each blossom was a blade. Their arms were positioned just so, their eyes propped open with tiny pins, mouths filled with flowers made of glass, and they were left to die, not quickly, not privately, but slowly, surrounded by nobles sipping wine and listening to string quartets. A garden party in hell. You walk past one of the metal statues now. At first, you think it's just sculpture. Then you notice the ribs, too detailed to be art. The fingernails, still cracked, and at the base, a tooth, still gleaming. The Iron Garden was more than execution. It was erasure made elegant. The victims weren't just killed, they were aestheticized, transformed into decorations. The queen believed she was creating beauty from betrayal. Each body, she once said, fertilizes the will of the crown. But not everyone was enchanted. A young servant girl, just 15, witnessed the death of her brother, accused of stealing silverware. He was impaled beneath an iron tulip. It took him 2 days to die. She escaped the palace, ran barefoot through the countryside, reached a monastery, and she told everything. The monks were horrified. They wrote to the Vatican, to the Holy Roman Emperor, to anyone who would listen. Eventually, they did. A delegation arrived under cover of night. They found the garden still in use. The Queen had added a new section, a maze of iron ivy, with living bodies suspended between the vines. Their mouths sewn shut, their eyes replaced with polished stone. The church declared it a blasphemy in bloom. The Queen was arrested, declared unfit, sent to a convent. The iron garden was burned, salted, buried, but not erased, because the soil remembers, and sometimes iron still sprouts from the earth, black vines rising through the frost, petals that cut the hands of those who dare to pluck them. You kneel now and place your palm on the ground. It's warm, too warm, and in the silence you hear something beneath the surface. Not words, not weeping, a groan, a breath, like the garden is trying to bloom again. You're standing at the edge of a nursery, but there are no lullabies here. No laughter, only silence so deep it feels like grief. A cracked cradle sways gently in the wind, empty, waiting. This is France, 1645, the court of King Louis XIII, but not the splendor you know from portraits. This is the hidden wing, the forgotten wing, where royal mistakes are buried alive. The boy was born screaming, not in pain, but in defiance. He didn't stop for hours. Midwives claimed the sound split mirrors. Nurses said the tapestries bled. His name was never recorded. The court called him Le Fils Brise, the broken son. He was the king's child, but not the heir. Heirship requires a face that can be painted, a voice that can be trained. But this boy, he was born twisted, his back curved like a sickle, his mouth drooped as if grief was congenital. One eye refused to close, even in sleep. He spoke only in echoes, repeating the last word of every sentence anyone said to him. God bless you, they'd whisper. Bless you, he'd mumble back. A mimic. A shadow, the Queen demanded he be hidden. Mercy, she said, but what she meant was, make them forget. So the boy was sealed in a wing of the Château de Saint-Germain, a wing that never saw sun, where the chandeliers were always lit, even at noon, where food was slid through iron grates, where voices echoed, but never answered. His only companion was a jester named Jacques, a man who'd once made cardinals weep with laughter. Now, a ghost in motley, tasked with keeping the boy entertained. And so the boy laughed at pain, at silence, at insects crawling across the floor, laughed when Jacques beat himself bloody with his own, juggling pins just to provoke a sound. It worked because the boy didn't cry, not once, not even when Jacques hung himself from the chandelier, a final joke. The boy didn't understand. He simply stared and whispered, understand. The nurses say he began to paint after that, not with brushes, with fingers, blood, rotten fruit. He smeared visions across the walls, distorted faces, weeping saints, crucifixes with missing heads. The priests came, declared it madness. Then, something worse. Possession, they sent an exorcist. He stayed one night. In the morning, the exorcist's tongue was gone, carved out, but no blood spilled. The boy sat calmly in the corner, smiling. Gone, he whispered. Gone. And then one day, the boy vanished. No signs of escape. No broken locks. No footprints in the dust. Just a single word painted across the wall. Over and over. Remind. 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 Some say he died. Others. that he was moved to the catacombs, or deeper into the ossuaries beneath Notre Dame, that his bones were used to build an altar for forgotten saints. But sometimes, in the palace at night, a mirror cracks for no reason, a chandelier sways, and a whisper escapes the walls. You step backward now, unsure if you're alone, because a laugh is echoing down the corridor. A child's laugh, and it's behind you. You wake to the sound of pages turning, not wind, not rats. Pages dot thick, oil-stained parchment being turned by a gloved hand. One at a time, carefully, like each word could bite. You're in Prague now. The year is 1574. The shadows in this room are not cast by candles. They're older, deeper. They've soaked into the walls. And in the center, beneath a crooked iron cross, sits the executioner, face hidden behind a red leather mask, hands, gloved aprons stiff with dried black. But he's not sharpening a blade. Tonight, he's reading scripture. Not the Bible, you know, the executioner's Bible, a hand-copied volume passed secretly from one headsman to the next. Never aloud, never in daylight. A book of ritual, of method, of prayer, not to God, to precision. You flip through it. Your hands tremble. It feels heavier than it should. The first page isn't ironclad. It's burned, a seared inscription, for mercy to mean anything. The blade must be perfect. The second page holds diagrams, anatomical sketches of necks bent in prayer, vertebrae annotated with Latin symbols. There are notes in the margins, not academic but intimate. Avoid the third vertebra. It sings when broken. Children must not hear the click of the gallows ratchet. They carry it into their sleep. Bless the blade 3 times with wine, not water. Water remembers. The executioners were not mere butchers. They were priests of suffering, custodians of the crown's final word. And like priests, they had sacraments. A page is devoted to the dance, the walk from cell to scaffold. It must be slow, but not cruel, measured, symbolic each. Step was a sermon. The condemned must weep. On step 7, or the gods would turn their face away. Another page titled Only Children. And here the handwriting changes. It's less steady, more human. A list, names, ages, notes, like, did not speak. Just held a ribbon, asked if God was watching. I lied. You begin to sweat. The words blur. This isn't a book. It's a graveyard bound in leather dot. And then you see it. A blank page, except for one sentence, scrawled in dried ink. Or is it blood? When the king sins, he calls the headsman. But when the headsman sins, who will come? You feel eyes on you, but you are alone, or so you think, behind you. The red leather-masked executioner stands, silent, still dot, and in his hand, the book. He turns a page. He's reached your name, because there's a final chapter, one that writes itself. Each time it's opened, each time someone like you dares to look too closely. The executioner's Bible is not a record of death. It's an invitation, a confession, and once you've read it, you can never unread it. The blade remembers. The ink bleeds, and the silence, it follows. You back away from the table, but the page turns again, by itself. There's one last phrase, at the very end. No ink, just pressure pressed into the paper. You run your fingers across the indent. You whisper. It allowed even angels require executioners. There's a village in the Pyrenees that appears on no map. A cluster of bone-white cottages circled by ash trees. No children's laughter, no birdsong, only bells. They ring without hands to pull them. They ring for her. The villagers call her Santa Muta, the mute saint, the saint with no face. But that's not a name, it's a warning. You don't find her shrine, you stumble into it, usually by accident or punishment. A stone church, collapsed inward like a ribcage, its altar still intact, still wet. The walls are carved, not with prayers, but with confessions, etched by fingernails, one letter at a time. I watched and did not speak. I bound my own child to the post. She forgave me. And then, always, she never screamed. You see, that's her legend. She was not a martyr. She was an offering. When the crown demanded unity, the church selected her. She was 12, or maybe 20. History doesn't agree, because she had no face, not because it was burned or torn. No, because it was erased, piece by piece. Each feature taken as penance for a nation's sins. The eyes, first gouged during Lent, then the lips sewn shut during Holy Week, the nose, the ears, the cheeks, removed during famine, drought, plague, until there was only skin, smooth, blank, a mask of flesh where a face had been. And yet, she did not die. Not at first, they say. She stood, bound to the altar for 40 days. And in that time, the crops returned. The fever broke. The rain came back. So they built a shrine, and they gave her sainthood, but not through canonization, through silence. Her name was struck from records, her bloodline buried. All that remains is her relic, a golden mask, hammered flat, worn smooth by the lips of pilgrims. Those who kiss it feel warmth, but not mercy. Whispers say she appears still, not in visions, in judgments, to executioners who enjoy their work, to priests who bless what should never be blessed, to monarchs who call their cruelty divine. She comes in the moment before the axe falls, in the reflection of polished steel, no voice, no rage, just silence. And in that silence, a mirror, because the faceless saint does not offer forgiveness. She offers clarity. What she endured was not holiness, it was obedience. Weaponized. It was piety twisted into ritual. And her shrine is not a sanctuary, it's a reminder of how far we will go, to cleanse ourselves in someone else's blood, and still call it sacred. You leave the village with your ears ringing, not with bells, with questions. Who gets to define a martyr? Why do we silence the sacrificed? And why, in every cathedral, is the loudest thing always the silence? Where the king sat, men vanished. The throne room was always colder than it should have been, even with torches burning, even with the crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder, sweat and perfume thick in the air. But beneath the velvet canopy, beneath the jeweled chair, there was always a chill, as if the stone itself remembered what had happened there. It wasn't just a seat, it was a sentence. It was a sentence. In Castile, they called it La Silla del Silencio, the chair of silence. A masterpiece of wood and iron, carved with lions, eagles, and crosses, but hidden within blades, spikes, pneumatic traps. It was rumored the king could kill a man just by letting him sit, not by command, by design, that the traitor would be brought forward in ceremony, not dragged, invited, honored. He would kneel, rise, step forward, toward the hollow throne, thinking a pardon had come. He would sit and vanish. The mechanism was flawless. A spring-loaded backrest, a false cushion soaked in oil, a release trigger beneath the armrest, disguised as an emblem of God's hand, and underneath, a cavity in the floor, where sharpened rods waited, where screams never echoed. The next morning, the throne would be polished, reupholstered, made whole. Again, no blood, no corpse, just whispers. He was pardoned, he confessed, he chose exile. But the walls remembered, and so did the servants who cleaned what was left. It wasn't the only throne built to deceive in Transylvania. A king designed a seat made of salt and bone. Anyone who touched it with greed would convulse into madness. In Florence, a duke's chair contained a music box tuned to a hymn. When the accused confessed, the song played backwards. The Devil's Lullaby in England. Henry VII was rumored to have commissioned a throne that locked shut, with knives that pressed gently against the spine, not to kill, but to control. The condemned would sit for hours, even days, unable to rise, to sleep, to weep, until madness took what the executioner didn't. These were not thrones, they were traps, and the monarchs who used them. They didn't need to shout, or bleed, or burn their enemies. They let the seat do the speaking, because in kingdoms where power is unstable, the throne becomes paranoid. It demands proof that the king is still feared, that the divine still blesses his rule. So the throne becomes a mirror. It reflects not authority, but insecurity. And the more blood it drinks, the more hollow it becomes, until one day the king himself sits, and the throne decides, he is not worthy. There are no songs about those kings, only gaps in the lineage, footnotes, stains on velvet, and in dusty cathedrals you can still find thrones roped off. Tourist signs say, "Do not touch." Royal artifact, unstable structure, but the real reason, it's not that the wood is fragile, it's that the memory is alive. Sit too long, and you might feel something stir beneath you, something old, something hungry.